If you are over 65 and you have a driver's license, there's a very good chance that the rules governing how long you can keep that license and what you have to do to renew it have changed since the last time you renewed in ways you may not be aware of. Across the country, states have been quietly updating their senior driver regulations, shorter renewal cycles, mandatory vision screenings, medical examinations required at specific ages, cognitive assessments being added to renewal processes, and new reporting laws that give your doctor, and in some states certain family members, the ability to initiate a license review without your knowledge, without your consent, and without any traffic incident having occurred. This video is not about whether older drivers are safe. The data on senior drivers is actually more nuanced than most people realize, and I'll address that directly. This video is about the specific rules that now exist, state by state, that you need to know about, and the specific steps you can take to protect your driving privileges for as long as it is genuinely safe and legal to do so. My name is Angela. I've spent years studying the intersection of senior rights and state licensing regulations, specifically the rules that have been changing quietly in state legislatures and DMV policy updates, and that most drivers only become aware of when they directly affect them. I want to be clear about the tone of this video. I'm not here to argue that senior drivers should never face any additional requirements. Some of the changes being implemented are genuinely reasonable safety measures. What I am here to do is make sure that if you are a senior driver, you know exactly what those requirements are in your state, what your rights are throughout any process that's initiated, and what proactive steps you can take to stay behind the wheel as long as it's safe and appropriate for you to do so. The first and most widespread way senior driver rules differ from standard licensing is the renewal cycle. For most adult drivers, license renewal is every 4 to 8 years, depending on the state, and can often be done online or by mail without any in-person visit. For senior drivers, that changes. The specific age at which requirements change and what those requirements become varies significantly by state. So let me walk through the landscape clearly. In California, drivers must renew in person, not by mail or online, once they turn 70. Each renewal also requires a vision test, and the renewal cycle for drivers 70 and older is reduced to every 5 years rather than the standard renewal period for younger drivers. In Illinois, drivers 75 and older must pass a road test at every renewal, in addition to the standard vision test, regardless of their driving history. No warning, no triggering incident. Simply having reached age 75 is what requires the road test. In New Hampshire, drivers 75 and older are required to take a vision test and a written knowledge test at renewal, in addition to the standard renewal process. In Florida, which has one of the largest senior driver populations in the country, the renewal cycle shortens to 6 years at age 80. In-person renewal is required, and a vision test is mandatory. In Indiana, the renewal cycle drops to 3 years for drivers 75 and older, one of the shorter cycles in the country for this age group. In Missouri, drivers 70 and older renew every 3 years compared to 6 for younger drivers. Here's the practical impact of a shorter renewal cycle that most people don't think about. It's not just more frequent trips to the DMV. A shorter renewal cycle means more frequent vision screenings, more frequent in-person appearances where a DMV examiner can flag concerns, and in states like Illinois, more frequent mandatory road tests. The accumulated weight of these requirements is substantially more than what the same driver faced 10 or 15 years ago. Action step. Look up the specific renewal requirements for your state and your current age, not the general adult requirements, but specifically what applies to your age bracket. Your state's DMV website will have this information, or you can call directly and ask, what are the renewal requirements for a driver who is your age? The second major category of changes, and the one that catches the most people off guard because it's so easy to underestimate, is vision screening requirements. Most states that require a vision test at renewal use a standard visual acuity threshold, typically 20/40 corrected vision in at least one eye, though the exact standard varies by state. Some states also test peripheral vision and contrast sensitivity, which are distinct from standard visual acuity and which can decline independently, even when a person's central vision seems adequate. Here's the situation that creates problems. A senior driver whose vision has gradually declined over years may not be fully aware of how much it has changed, because gradual changes are harder to notice than sudden ones. They go to the DMV for a routine renewal, they fail the vision screening, sometimes for the first time, and find themselves in an immediate review process without having any prior indication there was an issue. This is exactly why proactive vision management, seeing an eye doctor regularly, having any corrective lenses prescription kept current, and understanding your own visual capabilities is one of the most important protective steps a senior driver can take, not because the DMV is adversarial, but because the worst time to discover a vision issue is in the middle of a license renewal process. Here's a protection worth knowing about. In virtually every state, a vision test failure at the DMV is not an automatic license revocation. It typically triggers a requirement to have a comprehensive vision exam by a licensed optometrist or ophthalmologist, and to submit a report from that doctor confirming your visual capabilities. If your vision is correctable to the required standard with glasses or contacts, and you're already wearing them or will begin wearing them, that report resolves the issue. Action step. If your renewal is coming up in a state that requires a vision test, schedule a comprehensive eye exam with an optometrist or ophthalmologist in advance. Not the basic screening you might get at a retail optical store, but a complete exam specifically evaluating the vision parameters your state DMV tests. If there are any correctable issues, address them before your renewal date. The third category of changes, and the one that creates the most surprise and concern among senior drivers when they learn about it, is physician reporting laws. Many states have laws, some mandatory, some permissive, that allow or require physicians to report a patient's medical condition to the state DMV when that condition may affect driving safety. The conditions most commonly covered include certain neurological conditions such as seizure disorders, moderate to advanced dementia, and Parkinson's disease at certain stages, as well as vision conditions below the legal standard, certain cardiac conditions, and other diagnoses that affect alertness, reaction time, or physical control of a vehicle. Here's the critical distinction between states. In some states, physician reporting is mandatory, meaning the doctor is legally required to report certain conditions to the DMV, regardless of the patient's wishes. In other states, it's permissive, meaning the doctor is legally protected if they choose to report, but is not required to. And in a small number of states, physician reporting in either form is limited or prohibited, with stronger patient privacy protections. California, Delaware, Nevada, New Jersey, Oregon, and Pennsylvania are among the states with mandatory reporting requirements for specific conditions. Most other states fall into the permissive category. This is worth knowing specifically because in mandatory reporting states, a new diagnosis may trigger a DMV process that the patient isn't immediately aware of. The doctor's report goes directly to the DMV, who may then contact the driver. Here's what the process typically looks like once a medical report is received. The DMV sends a notice to the driver requesting additional information, a more detailed medical evaluation, or a driving evaluation by a specialist. The driver's license remains valid during this evaluation period in most states. The driver then has an opportunity to provide the DMV with documentation from their physician or a driver rehabilitation specialist, supporting their continued ability to drive. Action step. If you have been diagnosed with any condition that falls into the categories covered by reporting laws in your state, have a direct, honest conversation with your doctor about what their reporting obligations are. This isn't about hiding a condition. It's about being informed about what process may be initiated and being prepared to navigate it proactively rather than reactively. The fourth area, and the one generating the most discussion as states evaluate how to address it, is cognitive screening for senior drivers. Cognitive decline, particularly mild cognitive impairment and dementia, affects driving ability in ways that are distinct from physical limitations and often harder to detect through standard licensing processes. A driver with early-stage cognitive issues may pass a standard vision test and even a basic road test, while still having meaningful limitations in judgment, reaction to unexpected situations, or navigating unfamiliar routes. Several states are now requiring or piloting cognitive screening as part of senior driver evaluations, either at specific age thresholds as part of routine renewal or when triggered by a physician report or a pattern of traffic incidents. The specific tools being used vary, but commonly include brief standardized cognitive assessments that are already widely used in clinical settings. Here's what's important to understand about cognitive screening in the driving context. A single screening result is rarely the sole determinant of a licensing decision. A positive screening, meaning one that flags potential cognitive concerns, typically triggers a referral for a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation and often also a driving evaluation by a certified driver rehabilitation specialist who assesses actual driving performance rather than just cognitive test scores. This nuance matters because many people hear cognitive test and assume it's a binary pass/fail that immediately determines their license status. In practice, a properly designed process uses the initial screening as a starting point, not a final verdict, and a comprehensive evaluation can often identify specific limitations that can be accommodated, rather than resulting in an all-or-nothing outcome. Action step. If cognitive screening is part of the renewal process in your state, the most effective preparation isn't memorizing test questions. It's maintaining your overall cognitive health through established, evidence-backed approaches. Regular physical activity, quality sleep, social engagement, and managing cardiovascular risk factors, all of which have documented positive effects on cognitive function over time. The fifth topic, and one that creates significant anxiety among senior drivers when they first learn about it, is the unsolicited road test, a behind-the-wheel driving evaluation that can be required of a specific driver without any traffic incident having occurred. We've already covered 2 triggers for a required road test, being over 75 in Illinois as part of routine renewal and a physician medical report. There are additional triggers worth knowing about. A formal complaint from a law enforcement officer who observed driving behavior that raised concerns. In some states, a pattern of minor traffic violations that individually wouldn't trigger review but collectively suggest a pattern. And in a growing number of states, a formal referral from a family member or certain other concerned parties. Here is how the process typically unfolds when a road test is required outside of a routine renewal. The DMV sends a notice to the driver explaining that they're required to complete a driving evaluation, the general reason for the evaluation, and instructions for scheduling it. The driver's license typically remains valid during this period. It does not get immediately suspended upon the notice being issued. The road test itself, in an evaluation context, is typically conducted by a certified examiner and covers the same basic competencies as a standard licensing road test: vehicle control, following traffic laws, responding appropriately to traffic situations, but may include specific scenarios tailored to the concerns that triggered the evaluation. Action step. The most effective preparation for a road test, whether it's part of a routine renewal in a state that requires it or triggered by a specific concern, is practice. Drive regularly in your normal driving environment, ideally with a trusted passenger who can give honest feedback, and consider taking a voluntary senior driver refresher course. The sixth topic is the one that creates the most complexity, both legally and emotionally: the ability of certain family members to initiate a formal driver review with the DMV. A number of states have established formal processes through which certain parties, which can include family members in some states, can submit a report to the DMV expressing concern about a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely. The specifics vary widely. Some states have a formal written complaint process, others have a physician-only referral pathway, and a few have broader provisions that include family members or other concerned individuals. In states where family member reporting is available, the report is typically reviewed by the DMV before any action is taken. A single report from a family member doesn't automatically trigger a license review in most states, and in many states, the DMV has discretion about whether to act on the report based on the specificity and credibility of the concerns described. Here's the piece that matters most for senior drivers watching this. In essentially every state, a report, whether from a family member or another party, triggers a process, not a verdict. The driver receives notice, has the opportunity to demonstrate their driving ability through a formal evaluation, and can provide medical documentation supporting their continued ability to drive. I also want to address this from the family perspective because many people watching this video have aging parents and are uncertain about when and whether to say anything. This is genuinely one of the most difficult conversations families face, and I want to handle it with the complexity it deserves. A family member who has genuinely observed specific, concerning driving behavior, not just a general feeling that dad is getting older, but specific documented incidents, is in a genuinely difficult position. On one hand, filing a formal report can feel like a betrayal of trust. On the other hand, not saying anything carries its own serious risks. The most constructive path in most situations is to have a direct, honest, private family conversation first, before any formal report is ever filed. Ideally supported by a physician who knows the driver well, and with the goal of finding a solution that keeps everyone safe while preserving the driver's dignity and independence as much as possible. Regardless of what triggers a driver review, every senior driver in the United States has specific legal rights throughout the process, and knowing those rights in advance is what allows you to navigate the process effectively rather than feeling helpless within it. Right 1. The right to notice. In virtually every state, a driver must be formally notified before any action is taken on their license. This notice must describe the basis for the review and outline the steps the driver needs to take to respond. Right 2. The right to present medical evidence. At every stage of the process, you have the right to submit documentation from your physician or other medical professionals supporting your ability to drive. In cases involving complex medical issues, you can also request a formal functional driving evaluation by a certified driver rehabilitation specialist, a licensed professional whose assessment carries significant weight in the DMV's determination. Right 3. The right to an administrative hearing. If the DMV moves to suspend or restrict your license and you disagree with that determination, you have the right to request a formal administrative hearing, essentially an appeals process, where you can present additional evidence and challenge the determination before it becomes final. Right 4. The right to an attorney. At any point in this process, you have the right to representation by an attorney, and for a situation involving potential license loss, particularly if driving is necessary for your independence or livelihood, consulting with a lawyer who handles administrative licensing matters is worth considering. Right 5. The right to limited licensing rather than full revocation. In many cases, the outcome of a driver review is not all or nothing. Many states offer restricted licenses, limiting driving to specific hours, specific geographic areas, or specific vehicle types as an alternative to full revocation when specific but not comprehensive limitations are identified. One of the most effective strategies for protecting your driving privileges over the long term, and one that many seniors overlook, is taking proactive voluntary steps that demonstrate your commitment to safe, appropriate driving before any review is ever initiated. The first and most impactful voluntary step is completing a senior driver refresher course. These courses are designed specifically for experienced drivers who want to update their knowledge of current traffic laws and safety practices. Completing one often results in a discount on auto insurance, and in some states actually reduces points on your driving record, or is explicitly recognized in the licensing process as evidence of ongoing driver education. The second voluntary step is conducting an honest self-assessment of your driving. This means asking yourself and asking people who regularly ride with you whether there have been specific situations in recent months that caused concern. Difficulty judging distances, confusion in unfamiliar areas, slower reaction times in busy traffic, or anxiety in driving conditions that previously felt comfortable. The third voluntary step is self-limiting driving under conditions where your abilities may be most challenged. Late at night, in heavy rain or snow, on unfamiliar highways, or in extremely high traffic situations, while continuing to drive confidently in conditions where you're most comfortable. This kind of self-aware, self-limiting approach is associated with longer overall driving tenure because it demonstrates judgment and reduces the risk of incidents that could trigger a formal review. The fourth voluntary step, and the one that provides the most formal protection, is requesting a voluntary driving evaluation from a certified driver rehabilitation specialist. This is a trained professional who can provide an objective, formal assessment of your driving abilities, identify any specific areas of concern, and recommend adaptive equipment or techniques that can address those concerns. Having this evaluation on record, proactively, gives you something concrete to present to the DMV if a review is ever initiated. If a driver review does result in a restricted license rather than full revocation, here's exactly what that typically means and what your options are. Common license restrictions include daylight driving only, geographic restrictions to a specific radius from your home or to specific routes, a requirement to use certain vehicle features such as extended mirrors or automatic transmission, or a restriction to vehicles equipped with adaptive driving equipment. In some cases, restrictions also include a requirement to be reevaluated at a specified interval, annually, for example, to confirm continued eligibility. If you receive a restricted license, the most important thing to understand is that the restriction is typically based on specific findings from a specific evaluation, which means those findings can change if the underlying situation changes. If a restriction was based on a vision limitation that is subsequently corrected, for example, you can request a new evaluation and present documentation of the correction. For drivers who receive a restriction and find it limits their driving in ways that significantly affect their daily life, there are several parallel actions worth taking simultaneously. Working with the certified driver rehabilitation specialist who conducted the evaluation to understand exactly what would need to change for the restriction to be modified. Consulting with an attorney about whether the administrative process followed all proper procedures. And beginning to explore what alternative transportation options exist in your area so you have a realistic picture of your full range of options going forward. One more important financial note. If a license restriction changes what you can do with your vehicle, it may also affect your auto insurance coverage and premiums. Notify your insurance carrier of any license restriction and ask specifically how it affects your coverage, since driving outside of a restriction with your insurer, unaware, could create coverage issues in the event of an accident. Whether driving becomes restricted or simply less practical, understanding what transportation alternatives genuinely exist is important for maintaining independence. Because independence and driving are not the same thing, even if they've felt synonymous for most of your adult life. The first category of alternatives is ride-sharing services, Uber, Lyft, and specialized senior transportation services, which have become significantly more accessible in recent years, including for people who are less comfortable with smartphone technology. Both Uber and Lyft have programs specifically designed to assist older adults with account setup, and there are also dedicated senior transportation services in many areas that use trained drivers and accessible vehicles. The second category is community and nonprofit transportation programs, often overlooked but frequently available through local area agencies on aging, faith communities, and volunteer driver programs. These are often free or very low cost and specifically designed for older adults who need help getting to medical appointments, grocery stores, and other essential destinations. The third category is public transit, which varies enormously by geography, with robust options in urban and many suburban areas and limited options in rural communities. In many areas, public transit systems offer specialized paratransit services for seniors and people with disabilities that go beyond standard bus and rail service, providing door-to-door or nearly door-to-door transportation. And the fourth category is simply redesigning daily routines to reduce driving dependency. Choosing a home or apartment closer to essential services, consolidating errands, having groceries delivered, and building relationships with family or friends who can provide transportation for specific needs. These aren't replacements for a full driver's license, but they're meaningful strategies for maintaining a full, active life even as driving becomes more limited. Here is your complete action checklist. 1I. Look up the specific renewal requirements for your state and your current age. Don't rely on what you remember from your last renewal. Requirements have changed. 2. Schedule a comprehensive eye exam before your next renewal, even if your vision seems fine. Gradual changes are easy to miss. 3. Understand what physician reporting laws apply in your state and have a direct conversation with your doctor about their obligations. 4. Know whether cognitive screening is part of the renewal process in your state, and if so, what it involves and what triggers it. 5. Consider completing a voluntary senior driver refresher course. 6. Conduct an honest self-assessment of your driving in recent months and ask people who ride with you regularly for their honest perspective. 7. Know your legal rights clearly. Notice before action the right to submit medical evidence, the right to a formal hearing, the right to legal representation, and the option of restricted rather than revoked. 8. Identify now, before you need them, what transportation alternatives exist in your area so you're never starting that research from a place of crisis. Your driver's license represents something far larger than a piece of plastic with your photo on it. For most people over 65, it represents independence, flexibility, the ability to get to appointments, to see grandchildren, to maintain the routines that make life feel like life. The best way to protect it, for as long as it's genuinely safe and appropriate to do so, is exactly what you've done in watching this video. Understand the rules completely, know your rights fully, and take the proactive steps that demonstrate to yourself and to any reviewing agency that you take safe driving seriously. If this video helped you, subscribe. Every week, I cover the legal rights, financial protections, and practical strategies that help seniors navigate complex systems with confidence. Share this with every senior driver you know and with their adult children who want to have an informed, honest conversation about driving rather than a crisis one. I'll see you in the next one.